right, turning now to take a look at China, which is considering deeper involvement in helping bail out the Eurozone. Aaron Back joins us from Beijing. Aaron, China's political leaders have been making some interesting comments regarding their support for Europe's bailout funds, and now they're having to backtrack and say, no, we're not actually trying to buy Europe. Explain the reaction over there.
Right, so Angela Merkel is in China for talks, and we did get two messages out of Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao. On Thursday, he said we are considering increasing our investment in European bailout funds, although he didn't give any specifics. And today he said, listen, that doesn't mean we're going to buy Europe, which I think was actually a bid to actually address some political nervousness in Europe about increasing dependency on China.
Right now, of course, they are buying Europe on a corporate level, making a number of investments in North America yesterday, but also in Europe, and we're going to see them increasingly get involved, particularly in energy and infrastructure assets. They don't have to necessarily participate in a large scale in a buyout fund to get assets that might help the economy internally.
Well, we see that already in the U.S. I mean, how often do we hear concerns that China basically can push us around because of the treasury bonds that they owe? But we know it goes both ways.
It certainly does.
It's not necessarily in China's interest to dump its holdings of U.S. treasuries, for example, and the same thing happens with the Eurozone. It may make an investment, giving it some power and authority in the region, but it ultimately could face losses if it all goes bad.
I mean, if you look at what Tony James said, who's one of the brightest guys on Wall Street who works for Blackstone, he says now is the time to go into Europe and make investments. And you have to think that China is thinking the same way.
Is the Evan Newmark investment fund going into Europe?
Oh, no. I actually did. I bought some European index funds in the early autumn.
Stocks.
Yeah, stocks. Yeah. Just because basically everybody hated it, and I go where other people hate it, so that's why.
And it wasn't a bad call.
It was not a bad call. But I think for China, you're not going to see any bold strokes of policy on the economic side, largely because there's a change of leadership going on right now in China. I'd be curious to get Aaron's take on that. But my sense is in China, they're going to kind of go slowly, kind of keep the ship in the same direction and not do anything dramatic.
Aaron, how much does Europe need China's support here? Again, they've already been buying into the EFSF fund. Do they need even more just to make up for the other investors who don't want to step up to the table?
I think from Europe's perspective, they need everything they can get. And China's basically the biggest investor in the world, so they want as much Chinese investment as they can get, both in the bailout funds and in the European private economy, as you guys were saying earlier.
It's fascinating. I was reading a history of the Weimar Republic. Austria got involved in incredible hyperinflation, just like Germany did, and they essentially auctioned off the country to the highest bidder. Now, we may not see the same things, but there is that political sort of paranoia inside Europe that China's coming.
Interesting parallel. Totally inapplicable to this situation, but an interesting one nevertheless.
No, but I'd say the emotional reaction to foreign involvement and foreign ownership is no different than
today. But you also see that foreign involvement typically happens at a time when nations are vulnerable. Whether it was in that instance or when we're talking about Europe now, they are at a point where they need the money and are.
Well, what's so interesting is that basically Greece has said, you know what, we're desperate for the money, but we're not going to sell it on the cheap. I mean, they've basically been pushing the rest of Europe away.
But Aaron, hasn't China been making investments in Greece too?
Yeah, China bought a very large port in Greece and has been modernizing that port. I mean, I think you're going to see a lot more of this outbound investment by Chinese companies going forward. I think that's going to be a major trend for the next few years, and in Europe especially.
And even under the new leadership, again, transition happening politically there, but still their support for the Eurozone region continues. Aaron, back in Beijing. Aaron, thank you.